tie a rope to this end of the bridge. Then we tie the rope to the boat and carry it up the river. 2 of us get into the boat and push it into the river. We paddle hard to get to the other side. We tie the rope to the other end of the bridge. One of us pulls the rope and brings the boat back. "It won't work," Leon said, "but we can try it." "I'll go first," Joe said. "It's my plan." "No, let me go," said Pedro. "I am stronger." "You can both go," said Leon. "Pedro, you stay on the other side. Joe, you bring the boat back, and then you can take Manuel. Then you can come back again for me." "Good," Joe said. "Pedro, you bring the radio. You can use it on the other side of the river." Pedro got the rubber boat out of the truck and pumped it up. Leon helped him with his right arm. There was a long rope in the back of the truck. Joe tied it to the broken bridge. Manuel tied the other end of the rope to the rubber boat. "It's a long rope," Leon said. "It'll be all right." "Hurry," said Joe. "The water is rising quickly." Joe and Pedro carried the boat. Manuel and Leon walked behind them. Manuel held the boat. Joe and Pedro climbed in. The rushing water took the boat into the middle of the river. The boat crossed to the other side. It came near the bridge. Joe held on. Pedro climbed out of the boat. Pedro tied the rope to a piece of the bridge. Pedro stayed on the far side of the river. Joe pulled hard on the rope, and the boat slowly came back to Leon and Manuel. "You get in now, Manuel," said Leon. "I'm going last." "No, you're not," Manuel replied. "Your arm is broken. You can't get into the boat alone. You need help. I'll help you." "Manuel is right," said Joe. "You need help, Leon." Manuel helped Leon into the boat. He sat down in the boat, and Joe pulled hard on the rope. Trouble came suddenly. Joe and Leon were in the middle of the river. Leon saw the tree first. The rushing water was pulling it down the river. "Look out!" Leon shouted. Joe looked round. At that moment, the branches of the tree hit the boat. Joe held on to the rope. His feet slipped, and the boat moved away from him. "Hold on to the rope!" Leon shouted. But Joe did not listen. He let go of the rope and swam towards the rubber boat. Joe was a good swimmer, and he soon reached the boat. He held it tightly and kicked his legs hard in the water. The boat moved away from the tree. "Good!" Joe shouted to Leon. "The boat's free!" "Leave the boat!" shouted Leon. "Save yourself!" Joe did not listen. He held the boat and kicked his legs. A few moments later, Joe heard a loud noise. "What's that?" he asked Leon. "It's a waterfall," replied Leon. "The water will pull the boat over. Leave the boat! Save yourself!" "Look!" shouted Joe. "There's a rock in front of us. We must reach it." "Don't be a fool," said Leon. "Save yourself! You can't save me!" The water rushed round the boat. It was pulling them towards the waterfall. Joe kicked his legs harder. The boat moved quickly towards the rock. "Get ready!" shouted Joe. "Jump for the rock!" Leon was ready. The boat came near the rock, and Leon jumped. Joe let go of the boat and swam to the rock. The 2 men lay on the rock. For a few minutes, they did not say anything. Then Leon turned and smiled at Joe. Joe had saved his life. "We're not safe yet," Joe shouted. "The rain has stopped, but the water is still rising. It'll cover the rock in an hour or two." Joe was right. There was water all round the two men. In front of them, the water dropped over the waterfall. Behind them, there was the broken bridge. "We must get help," said Leon. "But how?" "Pedro," replied Joe. "He can help us. He's got the radio." Pedro was waiting on the far side of the river. He watched Joe and Leon. They climbed onto the rock. They were safe. "They won't be safe for long," thought Pedro. "I must call base and get help." Pedro climbed up the hill behind him. He walked quickly for half an hour. At the top of the hill, he climbed onto a high rock. He took the radio off his back and pulled out the aerial. Pedro spoke into the radio. "PX-75 calling base. PX-75 calling base." He waited and listened. "PX-75 calling base. PX-75 calling base." There was no reply. "PX-75 calling base. PX-75 calling base." Philip was sitting at the control desk. He was listening to the radio. PX-75 was Leon's number. Philip turned the dials of the radio. The voice became clearer. "Hello, PX-75, said Philip. "This is base. What's your message? Over." "Hello, base. PX-75 here. Pedro speaking. Can you hear me?" "Loud and clear, Pedro. What's your message? Over." "We're in trouble," said Pedro. "The bridge over the River Sandano is broken. Joe and Leon are on a rock in the middle of the river. They are above the waterfall. Can you send help? Over." "River Sandano, near bridge, above waterfall." "Okay, Pedro. Help is coming. Over." Pedro climbed down the hill to the broken bridge. Manuel was waiting on the other side of the river. Pedro shouted and Manuel waved. Both men looked down the river. The water was rising fast, and the rock looked very small now. On the rock, Joe was holding Leon in his arms. Leon's arm was covered in blood. His eyes were closed, and he did not move. Then Joe heard the noise. A helicopter. It was high above the broken bridge. "A helicopter!" Joe shouted. "Leon, look!" But Leon's eyes were closed, and he said nothing. The helicopter was soon over the rock. A rope was lowered, and Joe held it. Then he tied it round Leon. Joe held Leon with one hand, and he held the rope with the other. Slowly, the two men were lifted in the air. Leon woke up slowly. He was still half asleep. "Where am I?" he asked. Then he remembered the rock and the helicopter and Joe. "Joe!" he shouted out. "Where's Joe?" "Don't worry," said a voice. "I'm not dead yet." Leon opened his eyes fully and saw Joe. Joe was smiling. Pedro and Manuel were standing next to him. The four men were in a hut at base. Leon was lying in bed, and his arm was in plaster. "You'll feel better in a few days, Leon," said Joe. "I feel better now," said Leon, "but I need a drink." "Water?" asked Manuel. "No, not water," replied Leon. "I don't want to see water again, not for a long time." And they all laughed.